It was an ordinary evening in a small town, the kind of evening where the streets seemed quieter than usual, and the sun dipped slowly behind the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and pink. The local community hall was preparing for a small event, nothing grand or extravagant. People trickled in, some greeting neighbors with warm smiles, others finding their seats with polite nods. The air smelled faintly of polished wood and fresh flowers that had been arranged carelessly, but thoughtfully along the edges of the hall. There was a gentle hum of conversation, mostly about everyday matters: work, family, the weather. Among the guests, there was a sense of expectation, but it was subdued. No one was particularly excited, no one was expecting to be amazed. It was just another evening, a simple gathering to raise a little money for a local cause, to offer a moment of entertainment in otherwise ordinary lives. Someone had requested music, nothing more than a soft background tune to fill the spaces between speeches and laughter. No one thought it would be anything extraordinary, certainly not something that would linger in memory long after the night was over. She arrived quietly, carrying a small, worn leather case. Her steps were soft on the wooden floor, almost like she didn't want to disturb the calm atmosphere. She looked around briefly, taking in the faces in the room, the polite conversations, the faint excitement of people who had dressed neatly for a casual evening. There was nothing in her appearance that suggested she was about to do something remarkable. She wore simple clothes, her hair tied back loosely, her hands slightly trembling as she opened the case and began to prepare the piano. She didn't speak much, only offering a polite nod when someone glanced her way, and yet there was a calmness about her that suggested she belonged there, even if no one had noticed her before. As she settled onto the bench, the room's attention slowly shifted. The murmur of conversation faded into silence as people realized the music was about to begin. The request had been simple: a soft tune, something gentle, something soothing. People imagined light, pleasant notes that would drift softly in the background as they sipped their drinks, or talked quietly with friends. No one expected anything beyond that. Her hands hovered over the keys for a moment. She closed her eyes briefly, as if gathering her thoughts, her emotions, and the memories that had led her to this moment. She thought about the countless hours she had spent practicing in her small apartment, the moments when she played alone in the dark, when the piano was her only friend, her only companion. The notes she played then were filled with a quiet intensity, a deep emotion that had nowhere else to go. She had never performed for an audience this size, never in a setting like this, and yet, she felt a strange sense of comfort as her fingers touched the keys. She was home here, even if no one else knew it. The first notes were delicate, almost hesitant. They were exactly what the audience expected: a soft, gentle melody that barely demanded attention. Some people smiled politely, some nodded in approval, and others continued their quiet conversations, not realizing yet that something different was beginning to happen. The music was unassuming, modest, almost invisible, but it carried with it a subtle depth that slowly began to draw people's attention. There was a warmth in the sound, a sense of familiarity, like a memory brushing against the edges of their minds. People started to quiet down, turning their heads, listening a little more carefully. She continued, her fingers moving with a fluid grace that suggested years of dedication. Each note was placed with care, not rushed, not forced, just pure expression. There was a rhythm to her playing, a natural flow that made the melody seem alive. It was more than just music. It was a story unfolding, a conversation without words. People began to lean forward slightly, their curiosity growing. There was something in the way she played that made them pause, even if they couldn't yet understand what it was. As the melody progressed, it started to shift ever so subtly. The gentle tune began to take on layers of emotion, a hint of sadness here, a touch of longing there, a quiet joy intertwined with moments of reflection. Her music spoke to something deep within the listeners, something they had not realized they were holding onto. Memories surfaced, faces of loved ones, moments of happiness and sorrow, all touched by the soft power of her playing. People exchanged glances, surprised by the intensity of the feelings stirred by what they had thought would be simple background music. She didn't rush. She let each note breathe, each pause resonate. There was a careful balance between restraint and expression, a dance between subtlety and passion. The room seemed to shift with the music, the air itself becoming charged with anticipation and emotion. People who had been chatting quietly moments ago were now sitting upright, attentive, captivated without even realizing it. The soft tune had become something more, a quiet invitation to feel, to reflect, to experience. As she played, Her mind wandered through the journey that had brought her here. She remembered the long nights of practice, the small apartment filled with the sound of the piano and the faint aroma of tea, the encouragement of a few kind friends who had believed in her, and the countless moments of doubt when she wondered if anyone would ever truly listen. She thought of the way music had always been her voice when words failed, her refuge when life felt overwhelming. And now, in this small hall filled with strangers, that voice was beginning to be heard. The audience felt it too, even if they couldn't name it. There was a shift, a subtle change in the atmosphere that was impossible to ignore. People who had been polite, casual listeners now sat in quiet attention. Some closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. Others glanced around, noticing the change in expressions on the faces of those around them. There was a shared understanding forming, a collective acknowledgement that this was more than a simple request for a soft tune. Something remarkable was happening, something that transcended expectation. Her hands moved with increasing confidence, the melody evolving, becoming richer, fuller, more expressive. The gentle notes still carried their softness, but now they were layered with depth and intensity that surprised everyone in the room. She played not just with skill, but with heart, pouring her emotions into each chord, each delicate transition. The audience began to sense that they were witnessing something rare, something fragile and powerful at the same time. There was a moment when the room seemed to hold its breath. The music spoke louder than words, conveying feelings that were too complex, too deep to describe. People felt themselves pulled into the story, drawn by the subtle power of her playing. It was as if the piano was no longer an instrument, but a living presence, speaking directly to the hearts of those listening. She was telling a story through sound, and the audience, unknowingly, was becoming part of it. She did not aim to impress or dominate. There was no desire for recognition, no need for applause. Her focus was entirely on the music, on the emotions she wanted to convey. Yet, in her humility, she was beginning to command attention in a way that no one had anticipated. The simplicity of the request, a soft tune, was a perfect canvas for her talent and her heart. And the room, once casual and indifferent, was becoming a silent witness to something extraordinary. A transformation unfolding note by note. The gentle melody began to linger in the air, resonating with a quiet intensity that touched every corner of the hall. People felt the warmth and the weight of the music, a feeling that was both personal and universal. Memories, dreams, regrets, and hopes seemed to blend with the sound, creating a tapestry of emotion that was impossible to ignore. Every listener was affected differently, yet all were united in the recognition that they were experiencing something rare and beautiful. Time seemed to slow down. The soft tune, once expected to fade into the background, had become the center of attention. People were no longer merely listening. They were feeling, reflecting, connecting. The music created an invisible bond between the pianist and the audience, a silent communication that transcended words. There was awe, there was wonder, and there was a growing anticipation, a quiet awareness that something even more remarkable might be coming next. And so, the first part of her story unfolded. What began as a simple, modest request had started to reveal the depth of her talent and the power of her expression. The soft tune was no longer just a polite background. It was a window into her soul, a glimpse of the emotions she had carried for years, now shared with the world in the gentlest and most compelling way. The audience, though unaware of what was to come, was already changed, already captivated, already holding its breath in quiet expectation. The night, the music, and the woman at the piano had begun something unforgettable, a journey that would continue to unfold, note by note, until the room itself seemed transformed by the resonance of her heart. After the first few moments, it became clear to the audience that she was not just playing a soft tune. There was a depth in her music, a kind of emotion that made people pause. Even those who had thought they were just there for a casual evening, they looked at her more closely now. She seemed ordinary at first glance, but there was something in her posture, in the way she touched the keys, that hinted at experience and quiet strength. Her hands moved delicately yet confidently, and each note carried a story. She had come from a background that most people in the room would never fully understand. Music had not always been a public pursuit for her. She had grown up in a small home, where resources were limited, but dreams were abundant. As a child, she would spend hours listening to old records and trying to mimic the melodies on an old, slightly out-of-tune piano that had belonged to her grandparents. The piano was worn, with a few keys sticky from years of use, but she loved it dearly. It was more than an instrument. It was a companion, a confidant, a way to make sense of the world around her. Her family had encouraged her in small ways, often giving her a little space in the living room to practice, sometimes cheering softly when she played a melody correctly. But there were also struggles. Money was tight, and there were days when she had to work to help the family instead of sitting at the piano. There were times she had to repair the piano herself, oiling the hinges, adjusting the keys, learning patience through frustration. Every challenge she faced made her more determined, and the piano became a silent witness to her growth, her joy, her sorrow, and her resilience. She had never sought fame or recognition. Playing music was her way of expressing what she could not put into words. Each note was a reflection of her feelings, sometimes joyous, sometimes melancholy, sometimes full of hope. Over the years, she had played in small gatherings, in friends' living rooms, in classrooms, and in local events like tonight's. She had always been appreciated, but never truly recognized. Tonight, she did not know if anyone would remember her name afterward, but she did not mind. She played because it was who she was. As the evening continued, the audience began to notice subtleties in her playing. At first, the music was gentle, as requested, almost like a whisper. But there were moments when the soft melody would swell slightly, a chord here, a note there, hinting at emotions too complex for words. The music seemed to breathe, rising and falling, carrying everyone along in a quiet current. People who had come expecting background music were now fully attentive, their eyes on her, their minds and hearts caught in the rhythm of her story. Some in the audience thought they detected sorrow in her playing, but it was not the kind of sorrow that made one sad. It was deep, reflective, the kind that makes one think about life, about the moments that matter. Others felt joy, sudden bursts of brightness in the melody that made them smile or even close their eyes, savoring the sound. There was a balance in her music that seemed impossible to achieve. It was both delicate and strong, subtle and commanding, personal and universal. Her fingers moved with a grace that could only come from years of practice and dedication. Every note was intentional, every pause meaningful. She did not play for applause, nor did she play to impress. She played because she had to, because music was the language through which her soul spoke. And tonight, the room, though full of strangers, was listening. They were not merely hearing the music, they were feeling it. The experience was immersive, enveloping, and strangely intimate. The soft tune that had been requested had become something far greater than anyone expected. While the audience absorbed the music, she thought about her journey to this moment. She remembered times when she had been discouraged, when people had said that music could not be a real path for her, when she had wondered if she should give up, but she had persisted, learning from mistakes, celebrating small victories, and finding joy in the act of creating sound. She had grown through every challenge, and now every note she played carried the weight and beauty of her experiences. She also thought about the people she had met along the way, mentors who had guided her, friends who had supported her, strangers who had once complimented a melody she had played on a street corner. Each encounter had shaped her, each moment had added a layer to her music, and now, in this modest hall, she was sharing that history, that growth, that humanity with the audience. Whether they realized it or not, the audience, meanwhile, was quietly reacting to the change in her playing. Some leaned forward in their seats, drawn in by the intensity that had begun to emerge. Others exchanged glances, silently acknowledging the power of what they were hearing. Even those who had been distracted earlier found themselves fully present now. The music had a way of capturing attention without demanding it, of telling a story without words. People could not look away, could not think of anything else, because the piano was speaking directly to their hearts. There was a sense of shared experience developing in the room. People who had come alone felt connected to those around them through the music. Couples held hands, friends nodded in quiet agreement, and some even wiped away small tears. The music was uniting them, and it was doing so with quiet strength. The simplicity of the evening, the modesty of the request, and the ordinariness of the setting only made the effect more powerful. Here, in a small hall on a regular evening, a small act of music was creating a profound moment. As she continued to play, she allowed herself to feel fully, to let every emotion flow through her fingers. The soft tune began to shift subtly, incorporating elements of her personal story, the struggles, the victories, the quiet moments of reflection. It was not a performance in the traditional sense. It was a sharing of life itself. People felt this, even if they could not articulate it. There was a raw honesty in her playing that could not be ignored. Some audience members began to notice the contrasts in the music. The gentle notes would suddenly give way to deeper, more resonant chords, hinting at strength and passion beneath the surface. The melody, which had started as a soft request, was now layered with emotion and intention. People were captivated, not just by skill, but by the story that unfolded in every note. They were witnessing not a show, but a revelation, a glimpse into the heart of a woman who had spent her life learning to communicate through music. The hall seemed to hold its breath. Even the smallest sounds, the soft shuffle of feet, the quiet rustle of clothing, were silenced by the presence of the music. The piano no longer existed as a mere instrument. It had become an extension of her being. She poured herself into each chord, each transition, each pause. The audience could feel the depth of her emotions, and it was as if the music was touching something deep within each person, awakening feelings they had long forgotten or never fully understood. As the performance progressed, the line between musician and listener began to blur. People were not just observing her, they were participating in the story she was telling. Their reactions, subtle yet profound, became part of the experience. Some closed their eyes to immerse themselves fully, while others simply sat in awe, absorbing every nuance. The soft tune that had begun as a humble request was now a conduit for shared human experience, a reminder of the power of art to connect and transform. She continued, mindful of the fact that she was not merely playing notes, but weaving a narrative. The music told of resilience, of quiet determination, of hope found in the smallest moments. Each rise and fall of the melody reflected the ebb and flow of life itself. There was sorrow and joy, fear and courage, loneliness and connection, all expressed through her touch on the keys. The audience felt this, even if they could not name it, and they were drawn deeper into the story with every measure. Despite the intensity, there was a gentleness in her presence. She never sought to dominate the room, never tried to impress with speed or volume. Her power came from authenticity, from the honesty of her expression. People could sense this, and it made the experience even more compelling. The contrast between her quiet demeanor and the profound effect of her music created a tension that held the audience rapt. They were witnesses to something rare, something intimate, something that felt sacred in its simplicity. By now, the audience had forgotten about the original request for a simple background tune. The soft music had grown into a living story, one that could not be ignored. People were fully present, their attention undivided. They were no longer passive listeners. They were participants in an emotional journey, guided by the subtle power of her playing. The room was filled with a sense of unity and shared understanding, a feeling that what was happening here was meaningful in a way that words could not capture. She paused for a moment, letting a chord linger in the air. The silence that followed was heavy with anticipation, not because she had stopped, but because the music had created a space for reflection. The audience absorbed the pause, sensing its significance. They were aware of the depth of feeling that had been conveyed and were waiting, almost reverently, for the next note. In that stillness, the connection between musician and listener became even stronger, a silent acknowledgement of the journey they were sharing. The soft tune continued, now infused with even more emotion and complexity. The melody twisted and turned, revealing lay. The room remained quiet as the soft tune continued, but it was no longer soft in the way the audience had expected. It had taken on a subtle power, a quiet intensity that grew with every note she played. People leaned forward, their attention fully captured, their hearts beginning to respond in ways they did not anticipate. There was something in her playing that spoke directly to the human experience and honesty, a vulnerability, a presence that felt almost tangible. She had grown used to the solitude of the piano, the silent companionship of the keys and the melodies that flowed from her fingertips. Most of her life had been spent in quiet practice, learning not just the technical skills of playing, but the language of emotion that music allows. Every chord, every note, every pause carried meaning, a depth that could only come from someone who had lived fully and felt deeply. And now, on this small stage, in front of people who had only come for a simple evening, that language began to speak. As she played, her mind drifted back to the earliest memories of the piano. She remembered pressing down on the keys for the very first time, the strange thrill of producing a sound that came entirely from her own action. She remembered the first time she realized that music could express what words could not, that it could capture feelings too complex or fragile to speak aloud. She remembered long nights alone, sometimes laughing quietly at her mistakes, sometimes crying softly in frustration. All of these memories were etched into the music she now played. The melody began to take on layers of complexity. What started as a gentle, soft tune slowly evolved into a narrative without words. The audience felt it, even if they could not explain why. Some found themselves thinking about their own lives, the moments of struggle, joy, and quiet reflection that had defined their journeys. Others simply let themselves be carried along by the ebb and flow of the music, surrendering to the experience without analyzing it. It was intimate and communal at the same time, a rare combination that few could have anticipated in a small community hall. Her fingers danced across the keys, not with speed, but with intention. Each note was deliberate, chosen for its emotional resonance. She allowed pauses to linger, letting the sound hang in the air, giving the audience time to absorb it, to feel it, to become part of it. There was a rhythm to her playing, a heartbeat that matched the collective pulse of the room. People unconsciously mirrored the music, leaning in, relaxing, breathing more deeply, becoming attuned to the subtle changes in tempo and tone. She remembered the people who had helped her along the way, the teacher who had shown her the value of patience, the friend who had applauded her first public performance, the strangers who had offered encouragement when she least expected it. Their kindnesses, small but profound, had shaped her journey and found their way into the music. Each note carried a trace of gratitude, a whisper of the connections she had made in her life. The audience may not have known the stories behind the notes, but they could feel their authenticity. The music began to grow richer, the simple tune stretching into something more elaborate. Harmonies interwove with the main melody, creating layers that added emotional depth. There were moments of gentle sorrow, where the notes lingered with a tender sadness, and moments of lightness, where the melody lifted like a gentle breeze. People noticed the subtle shifts, their emotions responding instinctively. Some closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. Others leaned back, absorbing every nuance with quiet awe. She paused briefly, allowing a chord to hang in the air, a soft echo of the emotion she had just expressed. The silence that followed was not empty. It was full of meaning, a space for reflection and connection. The audience felt it, sensing that the music had more to say, that the story was still unfolding. Even without knowing her, they felt her presence, her humanity, her vulnerability. There was a magnetic quality to her playing, a pull that went beyond skill and talent, touching something universal in those who listened. Her mind wandered to the challenges she had faced, times when she had doubted her abilities, moments when the world had seemed indifferent or discouraging, and nights spent playing alone to keep hope alive. Each struggle had shaped her, each victory had strengthened her, and all of it now resonated in the music. The piano was not just an instrument, it was a record of her life, a reflection of her growth, and a vessel for the emotions she had carried for so long. The audience could sense the authenticity, and it made the experience unforgettable. She noticed the reactions in the room. A young woman sitting near the front had tears in her eyes. An older man clasped his hands tightly, as if trying to contain the emotions rising within him. A child stared wide-eyed, captivated by the sound, sensing the story even without understanding it fully. These small, silent responses were more valuable to her than applause or recognition. They were proof that the music had found a way to connect, to reach beyond mere sound and touch the hearts of those who listened. As the melody continued, she allowed herself to explore the full range of her emotions. The music swelled and softened, rose and fell, reflecting the complexity of human experience. There was a sense of tension and release, a journey that mirrored the ups and downs of life itself. The audience was not merely hearing notes, they were experiencing the emotions behind them. The soft tune requested at the start had become a vessel for her soul, and the room was transformed by its presence. She had learned over the years that music has the power to create empathy, to allow people to step into someone else's experience without words. She played with that understanding, weaving her feelings into the melody in a way that was subtle but undeniable. The audience responded instinctively, feeling emotions that were not their own but somehow familiar. They were carried along by the rhythm, by the phrasing, by the delicate balance of sound and silence. Each note was a conversation, each pause a shared understanding. She remembered performing in small, unnoticed settings before, at local events, in classrooms, and at community gatherings. The difference tonight was not the setting, but the way people were listening. They were present in a way that transcended expectations, fully engaged, fully attentive. There was a quiet magic in the room, a sense that something extraordinary was unfolding even in the ordinary setting. She felt the connection, felt the shared energy, and allowed it to guide her playing. The melody began to evolve further, incorporating subtle variations that hinted at emotions too complex for words. There was hope in some passages, longing in others, and a quiet strength underlying it all. Her playing was not just a performance. It was a living expression of her inner world. The audience, though unaware of the details of her life, could sense the honesty and depth behind every chord. They were witnessing not a show, but a glimpse into a human soul, communicated through the universal language of music. Some people in the audience found themselves thinking about their own experiences, the challenges they had faced, the moments of joy they had cherished, the quiet losses that had shaped them. Others simply allowed themselves to be immersed, surrendering to the beauty of the sound, the ebb and flow of the melody. The music created a shared emotional space, connecting strangers in ways that words could never achieve. The room felt alive with feeling, each listener carrying their own private reactions while also sensing the collective energy. She was aware of the impact she was having, but she did not let it distract her. Her focus remained on the music, on expressing what words could not. She played with intention, with heart, with the knowledge that each note mattered, that every pause was significant. The soft tune, once humble and unassuming, had become a conduit for emotion, a bridge between the personal and the universal. The audience felt it in every fiber of their being. As the music progressed, she introduced small flourishes, delicate runs, subtle shifts in dynamics, unexpected harmonies. They were not showy or excessive. They were natural extensions of the story she was telling. The audience noticed these details, even if only subconsciously. They added depth, texture, and richness to the melody, enhancing the emotional journey without overwhelming it. Each listener was affected differently, yet all were united by the experience, connected through the invisible threads of music and feeling. She reflected on the journey that had led her here, the years of practice, the quiet determination, the moments of self-doubt and resilience. Every challenge had been a lesson, every triumph a quiet affirmation of her path. And now, in this small hall, she was sharing that journey, allowing others to feel the emotions she had carried for so long. The soft tune had become a living story, unfolding in real time, touching hearts in ways she could never have predicted. The room remained still, the silence between notes filled with anticipation and meaning. Each chord resonated with the experiences she had lived and the emotions she had felt. The audience could sense it, even if they could not name it, and they were drawn deeper into the story. There was awe, there was wonder, and there was a quiet reverence for the honesty of her expression. They were witnessing something rare, something intimate, something that would stay with them long after the night was over. She allowed the music to breathe, to ebb and flow naturally, without forcing it or rushing it. The melody became more expressive, more layered, more. As the melody continued, the music began to change in a way that caught the audience off guard. The soft tune that had started as a gentle background request now carried a force, a kind of emotional roar that was quiet but undeniable. Each note she struck seemed to have weight, resonance, and a depth that filled the hall in ways no one had anticipated. The audience, still seated, felt as though they had been pulled into another world, one where the music spoke truths they could not put into words. Her hands moved with precision, confidence, and a passion that had been tempered by years of practice and life experience. There was no rush, no desire to impress. Every chord, every transition, every pause was deliberate. She allowed the music to flow naturally, letting it breathe and grow. Yet each moment was charged with an intensity that could not be ignored. The room seemed to vibrate with the energy she created, though no one could say exactly how. The air itself felt alive, charged with emotion, and the audience could sense it without fully understanding why. She had never performed like this for anyone outside her own life. Her previous performances had been modest, careful, sometimes cautious, never revealing the full extent of her power or emotion. But tonight, the quiet intimacy of the hall, the simplicity of the event, and the attentiveness of the audience created a rare moment, a moment where she could allow the music to speak freely, unrestrained, and the effect was immediate and profound. The soft tune that had begun the evening now transformed into a story with multiple layers. There were moments of gentle reflection, moments of deep sorrow, and moments of soaring joy. Her fingers danced across the keys, producing harmonies that seemed to shimmer in the air, echoing off the walls and filling every corner of the room. People could feel it physically, a subtle vibration in the chest, a stirring of the heart. The music was no longer background. It had become the center of the evening, commanding attention without demanding it. The audience watched her closely now, captivated by her presence. She did not seek recognition or applause. She played for the music itself, and that sincerity was palpable. People began to notice the small details, the subtle movement of her hands, the expressions on her face as she allowed herself to feel the music, the slight sway of her body as she immersed herself completely. There was a vulnerability there, a raw honesty, that drew everyone in. They felt connected to her not because of fame or skill alone, but because of the authenticity that radiated from her every action. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. Years of quiet practice, small victories, moments of doubt, nights spent alone with the piano, learning patience and persistence. Every hardship had shaped her, every moment of joy had strengthened her. The piano had been her refuge, her teacher, her companion. Tonight, it was her voice. Each note carried not just sound, but history, emotion, and life itself. The audience might not know the specifics, but they felt the weight and the depth of what she expressed. Some people in the audience could not hold back their emotions. Tears appeared in the eyes of a few, though they tried to blink them away. Others sat rigid, unable to move, caught by the intensity of the music. Children who had been fidgety at the start were now still, listening with wide eyes, sensing the significance even without understanding it fully. It was as if the piano had opened a window into a deeper realm of human feeling, one that everyone could glimpse, even if only for a moment. The melody began to build, layer upon layer, until it was no longer simply soft. There was a power, a controlled strength that made the audience aware of the magnitude of what they were hearing. Yet it was not loud or aggressive. It was commanding in its subtlety, overwhelming in its quiet intensity. The music roared not with volume, but with emotion, with life, with truth. Each note carried her experiences, her struggles, her victories, her dreams, and her fears. The audience could sense the complexity and richness, feeling it resonate deep within themselves. She continued to play, allowing the music to take on a life of its own. There were moments of tension, where the melody rose and fell unpredictably, keeping the listeners on edge, caught between anticipation and awe. There were moments of release, where a long, sustained note lingered, echoing softly, leaving the room suspended in emotion. The soft tune had become a symphony of feeling, a journey that no one expected but everyone was experiencing. People had begun to lean forward in their seats, completely absorbed, their attention unwavering. She thought about the people who had influenced her, those who had guided her or offered support along the way. Every small act of kindness, every encouraging word, every moment of recognition had contributed to the depth of her music. And now, through her playing, those influences were woven into the story. The audience might not know the details, but they could feel the authenticity, the lived experience behind each note. It was as though she was sharing a piece of herself, and in doing so, inviting the listeners to reflect on their own lives. The music began to take on a more complex rhythm. Subtle changes in tempo and dynamics created tension and release, emotion and reflection. She allowed herself to fully inhabit the story, feeling each passage as if it were part of her own life. Her hands moved fluidly, confidently, yet with the softness and care that made every note resonate. The audience could sense the journey unfolding, the narrative that had begun as a gentle tune, now a full expression of her life, her heart, her soul. She noticed the reactions of the people in the room. Some were visibly moved, tears sliding down their cheeks. Others were quiet, their faces reflecting awe and contemplation. There was a child sitting near the front, eyes wide with fascination, grasping the power and beauty of the music without fully understanding it. Couples held hands, friends exchanged glances. Strangers shared a silent acknowledgement of the moment they were experiencing together. The music had created a connection, an invisible thread linking everyone in the hall. Her mind briefly wandered to the past, to the times she had doubted herself, the moments when the world seemed indifferent, the nights when she had played alone just to find comfort. All of those experiences were now alive in the music. The piano carried her emotions, her history, her lessons learned. The audience could feel it, even without knowing the specifics, and it made the performance feel both intimate and universal. They were not merely observers, they were participants in her story. The melody began to swell further, building to crescendos that took the room by surprise. Yet even in its power, there was elegance and restraint. She did not play recklessly or loudly for effect. The intensity came from emotion, from truth, from the authenticity of her expression. The audience felt themselves drawn in, their hearts beating in rhythm with the music, their emotions moving with the flow. It was as if the piano had become a voice for something larger, something beyond individual understanding, yet deeply personal to everyone present. She allowed pauses to linger longer, giving the audience a moment to absorb and reflect. Each silence was meaningful, filled with expectation, with tension, with emotion. It gave weight to the next note, to the next chord, to the next phrase. The soft tune had evolved into a performance that was alive, breathing, and unpredictable, keeping everyone in the room engaged, fully present, fully moved. People felt a rare connection to the music and to each other, united by the shared experience of witnessing something extraordinary. The audience began to realize that they were watching not just a performance, but a revelation. She was not playing for fame or recognition. She was playing to express, to connect, to reveal a part of herself through the language of music. The room was quiet, every breath and every movement subdued, as if everyone knew that interrupting would break the magic. They had come expecting a gentle background tune, but they had received a glimpse into the raw, unfiltered expression of a human life. As the music reached new heights, subtle flourishes emerged, delicate runs, soft arpeggios, and unexpected harmonies that shimmered and lingered. Each movement was intentional, crafted from years of experience and deep feeling. The audience was transfixed. They could feel the power of the notes, the subtle nuances, the emotion that radiated from her presence. The music was no longer just notes. It was a living story, a reflection of struggle, joy, vulnerability, and strength. She thought about the people who had doubted her, the moments when her path seemed unclear, and the nights when the piano had been her only companion. All of those experiences were now embodied in her playing, each note a testament to resilience, patience, and authenticity. The audience, though unaware of the specific details, could sense the depth of her journey. They felt her story, even without words, and it resonated within them in ways they had never expected. The soft tune had become an emotional force, quiet yet undeniable, commanding attention not through volume but through truth. Each chord, each progression, each sustained note carried weight, meaning, and resonance. The audience was no longer passive. They were engaged, moved, and transformed by the experience. They were witnessing a rare moment, a performance that was both personal and universal, intimate and overwhelming. The music continued to evolve, taking on subtle complexities, delicate contrasts, and powerful expressions. The room seemed to pulse with the energy of her playing. The room was silent, not from fear, but from complete absorption. The audience was frozen, caught in the current of the music that seemed to grow stronger with every note. What had begun as a soft request for background music had become an experience no one could have anticipated. Every person in the room felt the intensity of her performance, as if the piano had become a conduit for emotions too deep to put into words. They were no longer just listeners, they were witnesses to something extraordinary. Her hands moved across the keys with confidence, but each movement carried weight and intention. She was not merely playing, she was expressing herself fully, giving life to years of experience, struggle, and passion. Every note had a story behind it, and every chord carried a resonance that touched the hearts of those who listened. People felt it in different ways, some with tears forming silently in their eyes, some with hearts swelling in quiet admiration, and others with a sense of awe that left them almost breathless. The music had become a living entity, alive with emotion and energy. It swelled and softened, rose and fell, and intertwined with the silent reactions of the audience. Each person felt a personal connection to the melody, as though the notes were speaking directly to their own experiences, their own emotions. The power of her performance was subtle, yet undeniable. The audience could feel it vibrating through the air, resonating in their chest, and echoing in their memories long after the music had played. She allowed herself to feel the music deeply. Every note reflected her journey, the quiet moments of joy, the long nights of struggle, the moments of doubt, and the small victories that had shaped her path. The piano was her voice, and through it, she communicated a lifetime of emotions with clarity and grace. There was no need for words, no need for explanations. The audience understood through the universal language of sound, and they were completely captivated. People who had initially arrived with casual expectations were now fully engaged. Their eyes were fixed on her, on the piano, and on the story unfolding through the music. The gentle rhythm, once expected to fade into background noise, had grown into a powerful narrative that could not be ignored. The energy in the room was palpable. Each chord she struck seemed to reverberate not only through the hall, but through the hearts of every listener. They were participating, though silently, in an intimate dialogue that transcended words. Some members of the audience were moved beyond what they could express. A woman sitting near the front quietly dabbed at tears, her breathing slightly uneven as she followed the crescendos and pauses. An older man clutched his hands tightly, eyes closed, feeling every subtle shift in the melody. Children sat quietly, their wide eyes reflecting fascination and wonder, sensing the power of the music even without fully understanding it. Every person in the room, in their own way, was experiencing a profound emotional connection. Her playing had an uncanny ability to reach into the depths of human feeling. It was not just about technical skill or precision. It was about authenticity. She poured herself into the music, letting every emotion flow naturally through her hands. There was vulnerability in her expression, but also strength. Each note reflected not only her mastery of the instrument, but her mastery of her own life, her ability to transform experiences into something beautiful and universally meaningful. The audience sensed this and were completely absorbed. She allowed the music to evolve, taking on moments of tension and release, mirroring the natural flow of life. There were notes that lingered, giving weight to the unspoken, and chords that built gradually, creating anticipation and wonder. The audience followed instinctively, their emotions rising and falling with the melody. Some felt joy, others a gentle sadness, and still others a profound sense of awe. The experience was intimate yet shared, personal yet universal. Throughout the performance, she was completely present. She did not play for applause or recognition. She played for the music itself and for the connection it created. Her presence radiated authenticity, and the audience responded in kind. People leaned forward, subconsciously adjusting their posture to absorb the richness of every note. Even the slightest expressions on her face conveyed emotions that words could never capture. Every gesture, every pause, every delicate touch of the keys spoke volumes. The audience felt an almost magnetic pull toward her and the piano. It was as if the music had transformed the room into a shared space of emotion and understanding. People who had come alone found themselves connected to strangers, united by the common experience of witnessing something profound. Couples held hands unconsciously, friends exchanged quiet nods, and even those who were alone felt a deep resonance with the performance. The music was not only heard, it was felt, experienced, and internalized. She thought about the countless hours spent practicing alone, the small, unnoticed victories, and the private moments of inspiration. Every challenge she had faced, every triumph she had celebrated, had culminated in this moment. The piano had been her companion, her teacher, her confidant. Now, it was her voice. She let the music flow without inhibition, trusting that it would reach the audience in ways she could not control. And it did. The melody began to take on even more complexity. Harmonies intertwined with the main tune, creating layers of emotion that deepened the connection between her and the listeners. There were moments of delicate vulnerability, where the music whispered softly, and moments of commanding intensity, where every note seemed to fill the room with unspoken truths. The audience was entranced, caught between admiration and emotion, unable to look away or move, completely present in the unfolding experience. She noticed the subtle reactions in the audience. A young woman sat silently, tears glistening on her cheeks, her body relaxed yet tense with emotion. An older man rested his chin on his hands, eyes closed, completely absorbed. A child leaned forward, eyes wide with wonder, as though sensing the weight of the music without understanding why. Everyone was engaged in their own way, yet all shared the same sense of awe and connection. The soft tune requested at the beginning had become a medium for shared human experience. Her playing had a rhythmic flow that mimicked life itself. There were moments of tension, pauses that held meaning, and notes that rose and fell with emotion. She allowed the music to breathe, to move naturally, to express what words could not. Each key she pressed carried her story, her heart, her experiences. The audience could feel it, each person interpreting the emotions in their own way, but all feeling the undeniable impact. The piano had become more than an instrument, it was a vessel for human emotion, and the room had become a sacred space of listening. The intensity of the performance grew. What had been subtle and gentle transformed into something profound, yet it remained elegant and restrained. She played with complete focus, letting her emotions guide her hands while maintaining the precision and balance that years of practice had instilled. The audience was mesmerized, feeling the music resonate in ways that were both physical and emotional. Every note carried meaning, and every silence carried anticipation. It was as though time itself had slowed, allowing the audience to absorb the full depth of the experience. Her story through music was now evident to all. It was a story of resilience, hope, vulnerability, and strength. It reflected the quiet battles she had fought, the small victories she had celebrated, and the emotional truths she had discovered along the way. She communicated without words, allowing the audience to feel her journey as deeply as she did. The performance had moved far beyond the original request for a soft tune. It had become a shared exploration of the human condition. The audience's reaction was quiet but profound, There were no gasps or exclamations, only a collective stillness and a deep awareness of the moment's significance. People felt their hearts and minds fully engaged, absorbing every nuance of the music. Some held back tears, others let them flow, and some simply sat in awe, unable to articulate the emotions rising within them. The soft tune had become a force that could not be ignored, a silent yet powerful expression of life, love, and experience. As the music continued, the room seemed to hum with a quiet energy, a shared understanding that transcended words. People were no longer just observing a performance. They were part of it. The notes flowed around them, through them, touching their hearts and leaving a lasting impression. The piano had become a voice for unspoken emotions, and the audience responded with an intensity that matched the music. It was a rare moment of unity, connection, and emotional resonance. She allowed herself to become fully absorbed in the music, feeling every note, every pause, every variation as if it were a conversation with the audience. She played with vulnerability and strength, letting the music carry her story while also creating space for the listeners to bring their own experiences into the moment. The soft tune had evolved into a living, breathing entity, a shared expression of humanity that was felt deeply by all present. The performance reached moments of quiet intensity, where the music spoke volumes without a single loud note. It communicated emotion, depth, and truth in ways that words never could. The audience responded instinctively, their breathing synchronized with the flow of the melody, their hearts attuned to the subtle shifts in tone and rhythm. The